Next, we are going to use the internal pattern tools to add darts to the front panel and gather the hemline of the dress. These tools are used to sew on smaller pattern pieces like pockets, or for other construction lines like folding pleats and sewing darts. Until now, we've only sewn segments along the pattern's perimeter, but using these tools, we can begin to sew together lines inside the pattern as well. The internal pattern tools can only be used to draw lines inside of a closed-off pattern piece, so if you try to draw outside of a pattern, you'll get an error message. The icons for the three internal pattern tools look very similar to the regular pattern tools, and they are also used in the same way. You can click points to make an internal polygon by using the Create Internal Polygon tool, and hold down the Control key to create curves along the way. Unlike the regular pattern tools, which have to exist as closed-off shapes, the internal pattern tools can be drawn as segments and polylines. After you are finished clicking lines, simply re-click the last point to complete the polyline. Click and drag to create rectangles using the Create Internal Rectangle tool, or left-click once to enter specific measurements. The same applies to the Create Internal Circle tool. Click and drag, or left-click to enter measurements. The Create Dart tool is of course unique to the internal pattern set, but like the rectangle and circle tools, you can click and drag to draw the dart, or left-click to enter measurements. When you use the measurement window, the point that you click is the center of the dart, and the left measurement references the distance from the center to the left point of the dart, right to the right point of the dart, up to the top point of the dart, and down to the bottom of the dart. Unlike the rest of the internal pattern tool set, when synced over to the 3D avatar window, the dart shapes are cut out of the pattern. In Clo3D, patterns are sewn using the seam lines, not in reference to seam allowances, and therefore the program automatically removes the excess fabric or internal shape created by the dart so that its perimeter can be recognized as segments. However, if needed, you can always create darts manually using the Create Internal Polygon tool, which will not subtract the area of the dart from the rest of the pattern. One thing to keep in mind when using the internal pattern tools is that the internal patterns cannot overlap. If they do, you will get a message saying that the lines are crossed. Also, lines of the internal pattern pieces cannot get too close to the perimeter of the actual pattern, as it affects the stability of the 3D simulation. When the lines get too close, you will get an error message. The best way to avoid these messages is to draw the lines somewhat away from the perimeter and then manually move the points closer afterwards. The minimum distance between perimeter and internal pattern line is 0.5 millimeters. Now let's try using the internal pattern pieces to edit the dress. Select the Create Dart tool from the toolbar and draw a dart on the left side of the front dress pattern. Because the sync button is on, the dart appears on the 3D garment almost instantly. Then, select the Segment Sewing tool and paying close attention to the directional notches, assign seam lines to the dart. Next, select the Edit Pattern tool and click on the dart. Just like points and lines, the dart is an element within the pattern as a whole, so we need to click on it again to really select it and not the entire pattern. Use Ctrl+C to copy the dart, and then Ctrl+V to paste the dart. Hover the mouse over to the right side of the front dress, and then click to place it. Hold down the Shift key so that the copied dart is aligned with the original dart. Then select both darts and copy and paste them over to the back side of the dress. Click the Simulate button to close all 4 darts. Next, we are going to gather the bottom of the dress by adding some elastic. Double-click to select the hem, then look for the Selected Line tab at the very bottom of the property editor. Then, check the box next to the elastic, and you will see that in the 3D window, the bottom of the skirt gathers just a little bit according to the default settings. The elastic strength controls the strength of the elasticity, and the elastic ratio controls the ratio of the elastic used. For example, if the entire segment is considered 100%, a value of 80 would gather it down to 80%. We are going to change it to 60. Then, do the same for the hem of the back of the dress by selecting the hem, turning the elastic option on, then changing the ratio to 60. Next, we are going to add a little ruffle to the hem of the dress. Select the Create Rectangle tool, then click and drag to create a pattern piece that is wider than the hem of the dress. Because both the Sync and Simulate buttons are on, this pattern is not only instantly carried over to the 3D screen, but gravity is applied to it and the pattern piece begins to fall to the floor. If we ignore this and then assign seam lines in Simulate, the pattern may not sew on nicely. So we are going to right-click on top of the fallen pattern and select the Rearrange Pattern tab. The pattern will move back to its last known arrangement, and then we can use the blue arrow of the Gizmo tool to move it towards the front of the avatar. We are going to copy and paste this pattern so that we can use it for the back ruffle as well. Then we can use the Segment Sewing tool to sew it together. We are going to position it in the 3D avatar window under the back dress pattern, and of course right-click to select the Flip Horizontally tab to make sure that the correct side of the fabric is facing out. And finally, we are going to sew the sides of the ruffles, keeping in mind the fact that the back ruffle has been flipped horizontally. If at any point you get confused about which side of the pattern piece matches the other, click on any point of the 3D pattern that you are unsure of. A blue dot called the picking point will appear on the pattern, and the same blue dot will also appear in the 2D pattern window, showing you exactly where the point you picked in the 3D space is on the 2D pattern. You can use these points to locate and sew the correct side seams together. Now we can click on the Simulate button to sew the ruffles together. Next, we are going to use the internal pattern tools to sew a ruffle not to, but on top of the front and back patterns of the dress. The program runs much faster when the Simulate button is turned off, so we're going to turn it off for now. Then we're going to use the Create Internal Polygon tool to click lines just above the hemline, holding down the Control key to mimic the curvature of the hem. Click the last point to complete the internal polyline. Then, copy and paste the line onto the back dress pattern, and also copy and paste the two ruffle patterns below. Note that when we copied the ruffle patterns, the two sewing lines of the side seams were also copied. Next, we are going to use the Segment Sewing tool to pair the copied ruffled patterns to the internal polylines. Then we're going to position them in the 3D avatar window. And now we can turn the Simulate button back on to sew the ruffles onto the dress. As a final step, we're going to decrease the particle distance to increase the rendering quality of the garment. Particle distance refers to the average length between the triangles that make up the mesh surface of each pattern piece. To adjust it, we select all the patterns and then adjust the value of the distance under the Pattern tab in the Property Editor. The default particle distance of Clo3D is 20 millimeters. We are going to change the distance to 5 millimeters, and as soon as we do, you can see that the length of the triangle segments become considerably shorter. When we turn the Simulate button on, you can also see that the gathers of the dress look much more detailed. However, when we decrease the particle distance, the simulation speed goes down significantly, so we usually recommend that the default distance of 20 millimeters is used to drape and edit patterns, and then it can be lowered to 3 or 5 millimeter distances once the garment has been finished. The particle distance can be set anywhere between 3 and 700 millimeters.